Coming up next on Twitch, this week in computer hardware, Corsair's SSD recall Thunderbolt is so dead. AMD brings back FX, one big GPU, budget Phenom build advice, rogue temperatures, and who cares about Chromebooks anyhow? It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 123, recorded June 9th, 2011. Just ignore that temperature.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by the man, the myth, and hopefully, if I'm not mistaken, by the curtain behind his head, finally back in Ohio, Mr. Ryan Shrout.
Close. I'm in Kentucky, but very close to Ohio. But I am back home. I'm back at the office. I'm not traveling anywhere for this particular recorded episode.
Why did I think you lived in Ohio and not Kentucky?
A lot of times when people ask where I live, I say I live near Cincinnati because I live 10 minutes from Cincinnati across the river. But I actually live on the Kentucky side of the river. So I live in Florence, Kentucky, hence all the UK stuff you see throughout the year.
I thought you just like to live dangerously and wear UK shirts in Cincinnati.
Nope. All blue blood, so.
That'd be brave, dude.
Yeah.
They take their basketball seriously in Cincinnati.
Yep. But I am back home, basically fully recovered now from the week in Computex up in Taiwan. So ready to get going on the show here and then travel again next week, but inside the continental United States, but as far away as you can get in the continental United States up to Seattle for the AMD Fusion Developer Summit, which is basically their take on the Intel Developer Forum. This is the first one that they're actually putting on, so I'm going to attend that, and hopefully it will be as good of an experience as IDF tends to be. So
that's pretty awesome. Anything at Computex you didn't talk about last week that's just really caught your fancy, or are you just Computex out at this point?
Well, there were still a few things that we saw either right after we recorded the show. It was pretty much towards the end of that week anyway. One of them is actually the first story on our list here was a Power Color, which is an AMD graphics card partner, showed off a 4 GB graphics card with two stock clocked Radeon 6970 GPUs. If you look at the picture of this is something we posted at PCPer.com. You'll see it's a much larger graphics card than you would normally see. It has 3 8-pin PCI Express power connections on it with a theoretical maximum power draw of something like 550 watts or something crazy like that. But I don't think I hope we don't actually see power draw something like that. It's dual 6970 GPUs, which is interesting because the current selling Radeon HD 6990, which is their the actual AMD designed dual GPU card, is a pair of 6950s, downclocked cores. So this GPU would be noticeably more powerful in terms of its multi-GPU prowess if they actually make it and how much they're going to sell it for and all that kind of stuff as well. But I mean, you can see even looking at the PCB is enormous. It's taller than your standard graphics card by at least 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. So if you have a tight case, then you're going to have a very good chance of this not fitting. But obviously, if you are willing to buy a card that's kind of this specific, this enthusiast-oriented, you probably are aware of those types of things. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting card. I guess the only other real key point here is that it's using a Lucid Hydra chip as the PCI Express bridge rather than just your standard PCI Express bridge in general. And what this allows it to do is this will allow the user to choose if they want to use Lucid Hydra GPU technology, which in my opinion is still kind of not up to where it should be, but you can still use standard Crossfire as well. You can just disable the Hydra driver and use standard Crossfire AMD drivers on this board as well. But what this would also allow you to do then is if you had this card installed in your system with the Hydra chip and the Hydra software, then you could install any other graphics card on any standard motherboard if you had a GTX 580 or GTX 570. And in theory, you'd be able to take advantage of that GPU scaling by using, 2 GPUs or 2 more GPUs or 3 GPUs total, something like that, if you are into the enthusiast experimentation market, I guess is what I'll call it.
That's pretty cool. And I was actually kind of fascinated. AMD is bringing back FX branding for the high-end CPUs and motherboards. So,
yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to it news-wise, but they took E3 was this past week, and they took that opportunity to announce the FX branding for their upcoming 8-core processors, the Zambezi processor, which is based on the Bulldozer architecture that we've talked about quite a bit here. So this is an AM3 Plus processor. Those new 990FX motherboards we talked about last week. Those are the motherboards that will be compatible with this type of processor. We haven't seen the FX branding in a while. It used to be AMD's top-end part, right? This was what was the competing against the Intel's Extreme Edition processors. These are the parts that were unlocked, that allowed overclockers and tweakers to play with all the different settings, and I'm sure we'll see those again. You remember most recently we've seen the Black Edition, Phenom 2 Black Editions were these unlocked processors. Those were the branding that they had, but now they're bringing back the FX brand, which I don't know. It's not going to do any good for performance, right? I mean, either the processors are going to be able to compete with Sandy Bridge or they're not. Right. The label on the box isn't really going to help. But it's interesting to see. It's also the first time I've seen the red color dominant on an AMD processor box, which is kind of interesting, as opposed to the standard green as well.
Interesting. Ugly news for Corsair this week. They recalled the entire 4 Series 3 solid-state drive line. Hardware defects is super vague. Are they talking about what actually happened?
Not in any kind of specifics. What they say is they actually call it, they say the root cause, there's no single issue at fault, that it was likely a combination of flash memory, the chipset, and the PCB design. One or all of those could have led to this particular issue. They said the solution will require changes to both the SSD firmware and the hardware components of the SSD itself, hence why they can't just send out a firmware upgrade and that type of stuff. It's almost kind of lucky for Corsair here because the Force Series 3 line is based on the new SandForce SATA 6 controller, the 2200 series, I believe it is. OCZ started selling those as the Vertex 3 and now the Agility 3 as well. What's interesting here is Corsair, when I was at Computex, basically told me that they were having trouble getting these out to market, that they were shipping much slower than they had expected because of some flash memory issues in terms of not being able to get a hold of enough inventory. It might have turned out to save them a lot of money, that they weren't able to just blanket the market with their 4 Series 3 drives because they would have to bring them all back. So, so this way, if you want to look at the silver lining type of thing, they don't have to pay to refund and return all those drives. Now, Alan noted in this news post that the cause is stemming from the reference design PCB. That means the PCB that SandForce basically hands over on a silver platter to these drive manufacturers and says, here's the PCB design, here's where our chip goes, here's where all the NAND flash memory modules go, and soldered on, boom, wash, rinse, repeat, that type of thing. The only other major vendor that has SandForce 6 gigabit per second drives out now is OCZ, and their Vertex 3 and Agility 3 series are not affected by this because they did their own PCB design in-house. They didn't use the reference design. So he contacted OCZ and they said, no, we're not we haven't seen any of these issues. We haven't had any of these returns or failures that Corsair is reporting. So, fortunately for users, this is not incredibly widespread across the whole SSD market. Unfortunately for Corsair, this kind of leaves them as taking the brunt of the defect, even though it may not necessarily be Corsair's engineers' fault. It's definitely their Q&A fault for not kind of finding these issues beforehand. Right. So, you can go to the Corsair forums, and there's a link where you can fill out the information. Well, they'll ship it out. They pay for return shipping and all that kind of stuff, as they should in this particular instance, and you can get all of that taken care of pretty easily, it seems. You posted an article here from a non-tech. It's looking at Ivy Bridge and Thunderbolt with the subtitle "Featured, Not Integrated." What exactly is this referring to here, where this is the Ivy Bridge won't include Thunderbolt by default, but it's going to be an add-on chip type of deal?
Yeah. So Anand was writing earlier this week, I guess, or wrote Tuesday this week about Intel's Ivy Bridge presentation, B being a tough consonant with braces. USB 3.0 will finally be integrated into the chipset, he says, but Thunderbolt will not. Intel clarified, quote, that the interface will be featured on some 2012 platforms, but it wouldn't be on all, and it won't be integrated into the chipset, which I thought was kind of interesting. In the thought that there's been a lot of noise in certain groups I travel that Thunderbolt was kind of stillborn at this point. That okay, right. It's on MacBook Pros, and oh boy, I can buy a really fast, thumb drive or external drive. But I think it's going to be really interesting. Thunderbolt potentially is kind of like one plug to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them. It can be, you can connect it to monitors, you can connect it to drives, you can connect it to your drive and your monitor and your RAID storage device. But at this point, I think it's going to be interesting to see if it ever gets any traction. With US, because I understand that technically it has advantages over USB 3.0, but I think everybody at this point understands USB 3.0 in a way that the vast majority of the buying public, the public has a huge impact on the availability of peripherals for new peripheral connections. But it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Intel decides to push Thunderbolt really heavily, or if it's just going to sort of die on the vine between now and 2014, when stuff starts to get really, really interesting. So I thought that was something. I was just kind of surprised that they weren't going to integrate. They were finally integrating USB 3.0, but Thunderbolt was not on the short list.
It's kind of ominous. Maybe it's just too expensive for them to integrate. It could be one of those things where they just don't integrate it, but every board they ship will have it on there, and that's kind of what they would need in order for this to not be appearing to be at least an abandoned project on their part. Now, and Patrick, I know you're a fan of maybe you're not, but you are going to become a fan of these self-contained water cooling processor kits, right?
I was fascinated by the PNY kit. Sorry.
Yeah. So you got the Corsair H60s, you've got Acetech, you've got Antec makes one called the Cooler, ironically enough, Kuhler. I've had emails and requests and questions, are they going to make something like this for graphics cards? It turns out PNY announced a team, a pairing up with Acetech to deliver sealed loop water cooling for CPUs and graphics cards. And what's interesting about this is that they're going to offer it in two packages. One is cooling just for the graphics card, and the other is a combination of graphics card and CPU on a single loop based on, a 120 millimeter sized radiator and 220 millimeter fans, or 120 millimeter fan, something to that effect. The processor part is kind of what we know. It will be one of those heat blocks that can be applied to basically any processor socket that exists today. That's all good. The GPU part's a little bit trickier though, because if you notice, they're not selling you a heat plate for GPU. They're actually selling you the graphics card with it.
And that's where it starts to get kind of painful, because it's it's a fascinating idea, right? You've got the water block for the CPU, You've got the cooling plate mounted on the GPU, but you're looking at the MSRP of $580 for the liquid-cooled GTX slash CPU cooler combo, or the XLR8 liquid-cooled GTX 580 with CPU cooling. It's kind of, sorry, my confusion. It's not two different cards. They've got a GTX 580 that's liquid-cooled for 580, and they've got a GTX 580 that also has the heatsink, the cooling block for your the water block for your CPU at $650. Of course, if you order now, you get a 16-foot HDMI mini to HDMI cable, a custom-built PNY 8GB liquid-cooled USB flash drive, and a liquid-cooled logo T-shirt. So, you know, I would really like to see PNY release this without the really nice GPU attached to it, because then I could afford it and integrate it into my existing system.
Right. The problem, of course, with that is, I mean, the reason they're doing it this way is GPU PCBs, graphics card PCBs differ even inside the same generation of graphics cards. So, you know, you can have two GTX 560 Ti's, one designed by Galaxy, one designed by ASUS, and they can have very different PCB designs, and thus the heat pipes wouldn't necessarily fit, or the heat plates, I'm sorry, that if they sold one that was just a heat plate wouldn't necessarily match up. That's why water cooling graphics cards tends to be more of a pain in the ass and also more expensive, because each of the heat pipes that you're using, or each of the water blocks that you use, is much more customizable, and it's handmade or something to that effect, right? That's why it tends to be more expensive. So they're getting around that by, you know, pairing it with the graphics card out of the box, which obviously limits your choices somewhat on what graphics card you get to use with it. And by somewhat, we mean completely.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not the right way to do it. I'm not saying it's not the smart way to do it. I'm just saying I wish I could, you know, buy it and jerry-rig something for my own GPU, but that probably would not be the smart way to do it.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that I'm trying to decide how smart they are, and that Chromebooks are finally going up sale. I caught a post from ChromeOSsite.com, which they were very excited about. Google tweeting, quote, "Nothing but the web. Samsung and Acer Pound Chromebooks now available for pre-order from at Amazon and at Best Buy in the U.S." And I automatically went to the Best Buy link and realized that they weren't in the stores yet. So I went to the Amazon link and I finally realized that these are pre-orders. And I still can't kind of believe the price on these.
Is that good news or bad news?
Acer Chromia Chromebook Wi-Fi, $380. But the really pretty ones, the Samsung Series 5 Wi-Fi and 3G Chromebooks, are $429 and $499.99. So they are not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. And okay, it boots in less than 10 seconds. You know, they're claiming over 8 hours of battery life. It's a dual-core Intel processor and a 12.1 high-resolution non-glare display.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's an Atom 5N70 12.1-inch netbook that weighs 3.5 pounds. You know, they're promising Adobe Flash. But, man, I just, you know, a 16-gigabyte solid-state drive, most of your life on the web. I'm just not looking at this and thinking, like, I want to drop $400 on one of these. They're nice-looking netbooks. I just don't know if, you know, I want a netbook anymore. Apparently, I am Mr. Tablet now.
It happens. Everybody goes through a transition in life, Patrick.
Yeah,
I mean, you're right. That does seem kind of way out of line with what I think the target audience of an operating system-less, you know, computer should be.
I mean, yeah, it's just, you know, a dual-core N570, 2 gigabytes RAM, a 16 gigabyte solid-state drive, wireless N, 2 USB ports, VGA out if you buy the dongle. The best thing about it for me is the battery life, but other than that, it is depressingly close to netbooks from 3 years ago. The operating system should be a lot faster.
Yeah. But maybe something that's more interesting, at least it was to me when I saw it in the show notes here, was a Zotac Brazos HTPC that you said initially was priced at $220, and then you said, nah, sorry about that. Now it's like $500 plus. I take it something changed after you continued reading the story.
Well, it's funny. It's because they're saying it's listed at $520 in the story, but in theory, you can buy it immediately off of like buy.com. Oh, that's what it is. Okay, because the pricing links are for a previous model of Zotac Z-Box, but basically, if you go up, there's another Nantex story I caught this week. It is a super slim Fusion E-Series Brazos chip inside of a very small box designed for home theater PCs, and it is a pretty cool design. Again, $520 for this is kind of painful on some levels because you're looking at an AMD E350, which is, I probably a more powerful part than the Atom, and 2 gigabytes of RAM, and actually, what's kind of cool is a slim roading, basically a Blu-ray drive built in, 250 gigabyte hard drive. So basically, it's a nice. You can either think of it as a Blu-ray player that has a home theater PC built in, or a very, very small home theater PC with Blu-ray built into it. But the performance looks to be good. And I thought some of the interesting stuff is looking at the video decoding test they did, which was looking like the video decoding quality, because they took samples from Core i5 2500K, NVIDIA GT 430, AMD 3200, AMD 6310, AMD 5550, and looked at the quality of like deinterlacing, noise reduction, brightness, color, and grab capture, so you can take a look at what's going on with the individual, how they're actually the processing is looking based on the CPU GPU choice you make. But I think Zotac's doing some interesting boxes. They've been doing some nice Ion based motherboards, and I'm kind of excited to see them doing the AMD Brazos stuff. So
cool.
As always, because I'm cheap, I want the price to come down, but that's mostly because I'm cheap.
Everybody wants that. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. I guess we need to take a quick break here and thank today's podcast sponsor, Netflix. Netflix delivers movies directly to your home. That saves you time, money, and hassle. No need to go to that dreaded movie rental store anymore. You can instantly watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed directly to your PC or Mac, or streamed to your TV via a Netflix-ready device, including the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, or Nintendo Wii. Plus, you can still get DVDs or Blu-rays by mail in about one business day. Watch as many movies as you want, anytime you want. There are never any late fees or due dates. Now, we like to go through the Netflix streaming options here before the show and pick out one that maybe you might be interested in, because nothing demonstrates the power of what Netflix can do more than the instant streaming. Sign up, immediately start watching anything that they have in their streaming collection, and probably by the time we finish talking about this commercial. One that I found that I had just recently watched is I'm a big Saturday Night Live fan, but I think most people will agree with me that maybe the 2000s weren't the best wasn't the best decade, I would guess, for Saturday Night Live. So I like to go back and do a lot of the best of SNL. And Adam Sandler being probably one of my favorite of my generation of Saturday Night Live cast members. You can watch his entire The Best Of series on Netflix streaming. I mean, surely there's nobody listening to this that doesn't know who Adam Sandler is, but I guess if you are young, you may not. They quote here from the Netflix description: from opera man to canteen boy, this dynamic retrospective contains some of Adam Sandler's finest moments on Saturday Night Live. Cajun Man, Gap Girl, and it also has contributions by Michael Keaton, Courtney Cox, Kirstie Alley, and Alec Baldwin, who I think is on Saturday Night Live pretty much every other week anyway. So if you want to instantly watch that movie or choose from thousands of TV episodes or other movies, all you have to do is register for your free trial membership at netflix.com/twit. Sign up for your free trial at that URL, and you can stream anything you want from that collection. Thousands of movies and TV shows. If you want to catch up on past seasons of something, go through there, check out, see what you got available. I think you're going to like using the service. And now they even have Android application for at least a handful of phones. I know my HTC Evo supports it, and that's helpful when riding along in the car on long trips as well. So be sure to sign up for your free trial. Again, the URL is netflix.com/twit. And we thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware and the entire TWiT network. You want to jump into some emails here? Maybe I guess we need to remind people where they can send our emails. We need more more weekly emails in.
EWICH@twitter.com. That's the email address. Or you can email, I should say email, you can tweet at Patrick Norton or at Ryan Shrout on the Twitter if you'd like to get a hold of us and ask us a question or answer us a question. We do take your suggestions.
I gladly accept answers.
Yeah, we like answers. Answers make us happy, especially when they're better than ones we've already given. But twitch@twit.tv is the email address. Pete has a question about an AM3 Plus build. He says, I'm ready to build a new desktop for productivity and video use. I like to be able to watch and encode HD video, but I don't need super fast encoding, and I don't do any serious video editing. I'd also like to be able to encrypt the whole drive, a SATA 6 SSD that I already own, with TrueCrypt. I'm not sure what that entails as far as processing power, not planning on any gaming. A few questions I hope you could help answer. Is an AM3 Plus socket motherboard and a cheap quad or 6-core Phenom a good pick? I like the Phenom CPUs. Will there be any AM3 Plus motherboards available soon with integrated graphics? The only one I saw on Newegg was the Asus Sabertooth, which does not have integrated graphics. To power the system, I was thinking of using a 7-year-old 350-watt Intermax power supply. Is that doable/advisable? The only peripherals would be a SATA 6 SSD, a DVD burner, and a case fan, all of which I already own. My target spending is around $250 to $400 if that matters. Thanks. Great show, even though all the model numbers make my head hurt. We know that feeling, the model numbers making your head hurt. The nice thing about TrueCrypt is if you're not doing any super high-end gaming or computing, you're probably not going to notice the processing overhead on that. I know there are a few Intel processors that support AES encryption. They're basically hardware-accelerated AES encryption, which makes TrueCrypt less noticeable. But with like a 4 or 6-core CPU and an SSD for everyday computing, I don't think you're going to notice TrueCrypt, a sort of TrueCrypt performance penalty accessing the data on your drive, which is a long sentence. Does the 350-watt 7-year-old Intermax power supply make you as nervous as it does me, Ryan?
Yes. The 350-watt number probably is a little bit low. You'd probably be able to get away with it. He doesn't mention what kind of graphics he's using in here.
He desperately wants integrated graphics on the motherboard.
Yeah, so I guess first on the power supply, 350 watts might be doable with integrated graphics. I would hesitate recommending using a 7-year-old unit for that purpose. Also, and even more so, I guess I'll point out that the reason you haven't seen an AM3 Plus motherboard with support for integrated graphics is because you're probably not going to. The AM3 Plus processor socket currently supports the current Phenom 2 processors, and it will support the upcoming Bulldozer Zambezi processors. It will not support the Fusion APU processors like Llano. Llano is a completely different socket. Don't ask me the pin count because I don't know it right now, but it's running off a different chipset known as the A75 that we saw many of while we were at Computex. And then the next generation of APU after Llano that will combine the Bulldozer CPU cores with the Radeon discrete GPU cores on a single chip. That will be out. It won't be out at least until middle of 2012 probably, and I don't think that's going to use this processor socket either. So it is not. You're going to have to, if you want to use AM3 Plus motherboard, which I am completely behind. I think that's a great idea because you'll be able to upgrade to faster 8-core processors down the road if you want. You are going to have to use a discrete graphics card, and if you're not going to be gaming on it, you can get a Radeon 6400, 6450, for $30, $50, something like that, and it will use very little to no power basically when you're just doing Windows-based stuff anyway. So, but I agree with Patrick in his insinuation here that probably get a different power supply. If that stretches you to your $400 limit, I think that's going to be a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, I'd almost say, get the motherboard, get the CPU, get the cheapest GPU you can find. You know, Ryan, 6,400, $30 that is the idea. And then if your budget absolutely positively demands that you use the Enermax power supply, it's 7 years old. Plan on upgrading that with the first chance you get. Mostly because I'm afraid that it's going to hurl, and second because Enermax, great brand, but they just did, you know, feel free to shout at me in the chat room, but most brands of power supplies were not made as well, and certainly not nearly as efficiently 7 years ago as they are today.
Nope, I'd agree with that.
So just, you know, if the budget's super tight, do me a favor and make sure the first thing you upgrade on that is that power supply.
Yep.
Jay has the Mac option question.
Yeah, he wants to know which Mac Pro would yield the best performance for handbrake, a higher gigahertz, a higher frequency single processor, or a slower dual core processor, or dual processor, not dual core. And he had a large, really large TIFF image here, kind of detailing the specs. The basic premise comes down to: would you rather have a single processor running at 2.93 gigahertz or two processors running at 2.6 gigahertz, specifically for handbrake? This is not even close. If the price difference doesn't offend you on those two options, handbrake is going to run much faster on the dual processor, slightly slower clock speed system. Handbrake is one of those apps that will use as many threads as you can possibly toss at it. And, you know, in general, the philosophy behind the question still stands. Would you rather have a higher clocked, lower clocked, more cores, higher clocked, fewer cores? For single threaded applications, which handbrake is not even close to being, then yes, it'll actually run a little bit faster on the single processor running at 2.93, but 2.66 is not that far off of that anyway, and you're doubling your core count or thread count, right? Depending on if you're, I forget what exact processors it was, but this, I mean, it's not even close in this particular example that he was looking at.
More threads are better.
Yes.
In no uncertain terms. Sir Coke has a question about building or buying. He says, I really want to have a computer to support a 6-monitor array stacked. I'm wondering what GPUs, graphics cards would be best to support such a project, and whether it would be cheaper to just buy a PC from a store like Best Buy or build one. I'm mainly concerned about the PC more than the monitors, since the monitors are roughly $100 for each. Any tips would be grateful. I think your biggest issue is actually building the frame to hold the 6 monitors, unless you plan on putting them in a big semicircle in front of you on the desk. And then second, I assume we want to roll with AMD for the GPUs on this, just to simplify having to plug 6 GPUs into a single machine.
He never really specifies what for, not like gaming or just general purpose computing or, you know, stock watching, that kind of stuff, because that kind of will determine what GPU I would recommend. If you're not worried about gaming, then you can get any 2 Radeon 6000 series or 5000 series cards, really, that support 3 displays, 3 monitors on each card. If you're going to do gaming, then you need to get one of the 6 output graphics cards, like the Radeon HD 5870 Affinity Edition, or I believe Power Color. I was look at the box sitting over here. Power Color has a 6 output Radeon 6870 graphics card then. And the reason I say that is, if you have 2 GPUs that support 3 displays out, you can't run them in Crossfire and then use 6 displays. If you're running them in Crossfire for gaming, you can only run them on 3 displays. So if you want to do that, you have to have all the displays coming out of one card. That's the only kind of like stipulation, I guess, in that.
And a display port to DVI video adapters, and so I assume there are no $100 flat panels at this point that support display
If there
ports.
are, he needs to let me know what they are.
Yeah,
but yes, you're going to have to get several of those adapters either way to get that to work. So
do you want to tackle? Oops, sorry.
I was just saying, either way, is it cheaper to build one or buy one for Best Buy? You're not going to find a system at Best Buy that has one of those graphics cards in it. You might be able to find a system that you can upgrade to it, but make sure you're checking your case dimensions on something unlike that, because the 5870 is a long card. The 6870 is a somewhat long card. It might not be cheaper, but I think you'd probably get a better value and maybe more fun out of it if you actually built it yourself. Where, this is computer hardware show. We like to promote people getting their hands dirty and actually building things, and you might discover a new love for DIY PC building.
Don't do it, man. Pre-buy it. It's a long, dark, expensive road.
Email from Darren about a VirtualBox box. It says, I'm looking at buying some sort of server for home to run a few things. One of these is a virtual machine within VirtualBox. Since the virtual machine is mostly CPU processing, I want to know if buying an older system, say a Core 2 Duo based, or a new system with a Core i3 or i5 will use less electricity. The server will run 24/7, but the virtual machine will only run during the daylight hours. It won't be running a local screen most of the time, so the GPU power usage doesn't matter too much. I suppose the same question could be asked of memory speeds, but I guess the difference there would be minimal. So it's interesting that he's asking about basically electric, how much power are they going to be using as opposed to what the performance levels are, anything like that.
Right.
In general, Sandy power efficient part as a platform, not just as a processor. So if you look at a Core i3 CPU that has integrated graphics onto it, if that's what you're looking to use anyway, since it's going to be headless, meaning it doesn't have a monitor hooked up, that the whole chipset CPU combination of Sandy Bridge is definitely more efficient than the Core 2 Duo based systems. My only question would be is how much more expensive are they going to be than a Core 2 Duo, and then weighing your electric savings versus your wallet savings of the immediate type of thing. I don't know. I would kind of lean towards a Core i3 here, more modern technology, and then you get better performance out of it to boot. So I don't know what's not to like that.
I was mostly curious why he decided to run a a server inside a VirtualBox, basically emulation inside of another machine.
I would hope he's using more than one, right? That's obviously the whole point.
Yeah, it was kind of one of those moments where you just want to email and be like, dude, why are you doing this?
Yeah, just put a Windows install on it. You don't have to do that. Yeah.
What are you serving? Peter's got a question about video to USB adapters versus USB to video adapters. Apologies if you guys have answered this question previously. Can you advise if it is possible to use a USB to video adapter for multi-monitor gaming? My guess would be no, as I expect these actually work as a discrete video adapter, and thus the game won't work across multiple video adapters, sans SLI or Crossfire, but just thought you would be able to convert. Thanks in advance and love the show. If you were doing Pong, you could probably power multiple monitors. It's kind of funny. I've never, most of the USB to video adapters go back to the work of a fine company named DisplayLink, whose webpage I'm trying to pull up at the moment. And it's a really kind of wild concept. When it first came out, one of the people who worked there grabbed me at CES. He's like, "You have to check this out," and hands me basically a USB thumb drive with a monitor output on the end. And I was kind of like, WTF? And it worked, right? Because it was just like, for anybody who's had to travel or maybe had a device that didn't have a decent external monitor or wanted to use a second monitor, and it's shown up in a lot of places. We actually looked at, there's this 14-inch secondary monitor that Toshiba has. It uses a display link over USB. Sure. Toshiba does a really interesting dock for it, but most of you find out are these USB adapters, and there's a little bit of latency going on, I think, that you're not going to like for Twitch gaming, and it basically takes CPU, unless they've changed the driver, it's basically a virtual GPU implemented in the software that spits the feed out over the USB port to the adapter, to the DisplayLink hardware. Or conversely, I guess the USB takes the the virtualized graphics signal and then converts it. I'm suddenly realizing I'm having one of those moments where I'm like, does it happen? There's definitely a penalty, not a huge penalty for running.
No, there is. Yeah. Actually, on the DisplayLink website, going into the FAQ here, it says, is DisplayLink's video technology suitable for gaming? And their answer is, while DisplayLink technology is targeted primarily to productivity and video applications, it is suitable for the casual gamer. If you're a, quote, power gamer looking for every edge possible over your opponents, you might want to go another route.
There you have it. And I think multi-monitor gaming, multi-monitor gaming kind of suggests that you're not a casual gamer and that you are a big, bad, insert name of your favorite crazy Twitch game here. So I'm going to say, and Twitch, when I say Twitch, like hitting the fire button, not Twitch like this week in computer hardware. So I'm going to say no, this would probably not be the best way to try to set up a multi-monitor configuration. It's an interesting idea, though. And hey, who knows what'll happen with DisplayLink plus USB 3.0 or Thunderbolt, should it still exist in 2 years.
Right,
exactly. Chris has an Asus P6X58D premium board and has a question about triple PCI Express slots. People are really getting into the multiple monitors. I blame you, Brian.
That's good. I'll accept that.
He says, I currently run two ATI 5770 Crossfire graphics cards powering 3 monitors in 1920 by 1080. I'm planning to possibly add another 3 monitors for a total of 6 monitors across the 2 cards. I want to add a 3-ware 9650 SE RAID controller to the third PCI Express 16X slot. That would make the slots do 16X, 8X, 8X. Question for you is, would I see a noticeable decrease on the second 5770 card monitor? Mainly would be iTunes, Netflix video playback. Would I be better off going to a newer 6-port card and sticking with a single 16X slot?
You're not going to see any performance gap there. The by 8 is plenty for graphics card, and it's plenty for this level of RAID controller as well. No decrease on the second 5770. Not an issue at all, especially because he says mainly would be used for iTunes and Netflix video playback. That's definitely not an issue. No need to upgrade to a newer 6-port graphics card other than the wow and neato factor. But it sounds like he's got a pretty well set up rig here as it is. So, hey, more power to people that have 6 monitors, because we have a 6-monitor configuration here, but it doesn't get used on any kind of daily basis. It's just something we have when we get those 6-headed graphics cards in and we need to test everything. But I guess I'll take that blame, but I think that's pretty cool still nonetheless. Let's see. We got a few more questions here. We got a tweet from Lightsworn says, this is just for fun. What do you think was the coolest and or most important thing at E3? And were there any surprises? Did you actually go to E3, Patrick, this year?
Sadly, I have not been to E3 in several years. I was actually kind of excited for E3. Our friends over at Destructoid, the Detoid show crew, actually contributed their picks for the best stuff at E3 that's in the episode of Texzilla that's posting on Monday. And it's kind of funny because I've been reading around what different people were saying, like who won E3 or what their tops picks were. And I was surprised at how excited you can really tell, like, who's a Nintendo fan person and who isn't based on how excited they were about the thing that is so terribly named. It makes the Wii seem like the most brilliant piece of branding in history.
Yes.
The Forza looks amazing. The graphics on Forza looks really good. Some of the demos I saw. The PlayStation Vita, some people were pretty excited about. Obviously,
used to be called the NGP, right?
Yeah. Which that I don't understand so much. I'm still kind of fascinated by the Wii U and the tablet controller for the Wii U, which obviously is taking some serious cues from the iPad and the iPad. It was just a really interesting, because I was like, didn't we just get used to this from Nintendo, and now it's going to be the world's biggest Nintendo controller with a screen in the middle of it?
That's all boring now, though, Patrick.
Apparently, I'm just happy that the Wii's finally going to go HD. Um, that's pretty much the most excited thing I have to say about Nintendo.
I think when we first heard rumors about that type of screen, we all thought they were crazy, right? Like, yeah, sure, right. They're going to have a 6.4-inch touchscreen. Now it is resistive and it's not multi-touch, so there are some concessions they made to get it probably to what it will be a lower price. But I still thought that was the most interesting technology out of E3. Not a lot of hardware news other than that out of the show. So that's what I think there.
Actually,
another tweet from M. Colonel. Were you gonna say something else on E3?
Oh, I just discovered that a Kinect-enabled Fruit Ninja is now available, and I'm almost tempted. I'm almost tempted to buy an Xbox 360 and a Kinect, even though it may mean my wife will kill me when I walk in the door, just because I want to try to see. My son's obsessed with Fruit Ninja on the iPhone, so toddler plus Kinect plus Fruit Ninja on the giant projector screen. This could be a serious gaming win right up to the point where my wife sues for divorce.
Let's see. Two more. A tweet from M. Colonel says, did you see any gaming mini ITX Z68 motherboards at Computex? I saw a lot of Z68 motherboards. I saw several micro ATX. Mini ITX, I don't believe I saw any of those at the show. And in terms of gaming, I'm assuming maybe he means, I don't know. Mini ITX motherboard is only going to have one PCI Express slot for a graphics card, so you're not going to be able to do multi-GPU on it, no matter what, whatever kind of design or PCB or layout they have, right? So it's only going to be able to fit one graphics card. There will be mini ITX Z68 motherboards. So expect to see them from Zotac, and maybe even like Jetway, who's kind of more of a systems integrator type builder. But, we saw some pretty interesting micro MATX, not mini ITX, but MATX boards. Asus had one that does support SLI and Crossfire in an MATX form factor and has a whole lot of overclocking and features like that, if that's what he's looking for. Just go to pcper.com/Computex and filter through some of that. You'll see the Asus announcements there. But there were some other micro ATX, but no mini ITX yet, unfortunately.
And finally, Belhade has a rogue temp sensor. He says, first off, we've got a rogue reading from a speed fan on my system that I'm a bit concerned about. Most of the readings are within reasonable ranges, temp 1, temp 2, GPU, core, etc. Go from the mid-30s on boot up to 60 or so under load. But one sensor, temp 3, regularly starts at 70 and goes up to and past 100 degrees. I did a bit of digging and saw that the sensor is 98718F chip, and some posts have claimed that this is a BIOS sensor that can be ignored. Furthermore, they claim that SpeedFan has miscalibrated this particular sensor to read about 10 degrees hotter than it should, which still puts it into the 60 to 90 degree range. There does seem to be a lot of awfully hot air coming out of the power supply unit area, and since we're in the balmy 90 degree spring days of New York, WTF, yeah, summer has come early. There's been like a half dozen plus 104 degree temperature days in Oklahoma. It is going to be hot this year if it keeps us up. The sensor hit 112 last night while playing Age of Empires 3. Is this something that I can indeed ignore, or do I run the risk of the BIOS or something else going China syndrome through my system? Well, first up, as someone who had a tempestuous relationship with processors in the late 90s, involving overclocking, heating, and a cooling block fail or 4. The nice thing about modern processors is if they get too hot, they are designed to throttle down and then shut themselves down before they die. 2, whenever I get a rogue temperature reading, my first thing I always want to do is, if I built the system myself, or actually even if I purchased it, I want to basically open up the system, rip the cooling block off, get my rubbing alcohol out, clean the CPU, clean the block, and put a nice, fresh, appropriately applied layer of, whatever your thermal paste of choice is, and then give it a couple days to settle in, and then see if that drops the temperature at all. And also, man, try other temperature monitoring applications, because if people on the boards are saying it's miscalibrated, you might want to check some of these speed fan alternatives out there to monitor your temperatures, because it's always kind of amazing to watch the same thing have different values depending on what application you're running. And I find that a little disturbing. To say the very least. You know what I mean? Because it's cool to see that you're paying this much attention to your temperatures inside your system. On the other hand, if there's a real problem, it's going to take care of itself by shutting down. I would say if you're in a hot area with bad cooling, I would start making sure that like you've got space behind your power supply, that you've got a good supply of air going through the system, that the cat's not sleeping on the system and filling it full of hair in the wee small hours of the morning. The second most disgusting computer case I ever saw inside of was had somebody's long-haired cat had been sleeping on it.
Yep.
Because it was warm and the cat liked the warm computer, and the end result was amazing. It was like a 70s custom van, because the entire inside of the case was kind of fur-lined, if you can imagine. It was epically awful. It was scary. I mean, are you worried about this? The temperatures that he's seeing and the fact that it's getting hotter and hotter in New York?
My theory on this is, if you had any component on your computer that was actually hitting 112, it would be on fire or smoking or something to that degree. I mean, even and that might be a little bit of exaggeration there, but at 112. I would even guess you'd be like, just go in there and see if you would feel that heat source, no matter where it is on your motherboard, move your hand around it. You would be able to feel a 112-degree surface or anything like that. Well,
you're also assuming he's giving us Celsius readings and not Fahrenheit readings, right?
Oh, I hope so. If it's Fahrenheit, 112 is fine. But I thought he mentioned Celsius in there at some point. No, maybe not. If it's 112 Fahrenheit, that's not really that big of a deal. What is that even? That's within reason. I mean, it's high, but it's not way outside of left field. I mean, we've seen processor temperatures here in the 50s to 60s range Celsius, and that's hot. Like, we prefer it to be in the 40s or 50s, but these processors are made to go into the 80s of Celsius and not burst into flames. So, yeah, I guess I did assume that we were talking Celsius this whole time and not Fahrenheit.
It's a safe assumption. It should be you should leave the temperature readings when you're looking at the thermal envelope information from AMD or Intel. They're going to give it to you in Celsius. That's
112 Fahrenheit is only 44 degrees Celsius. So if he's got to be talking Celsius, because that's okay.
Just saying. 112 degrees Fahrenheit is a lot less than 112 degrees Celsius is 233 degrees Fahrenheit. But yeah, it's kind of funny. You could try something. It's so funny because when you look like what's left other than speed fan these days, I guess CPU ID.
Yeah, there's been kind of a decline in high quality monitoring applications. So I saw Sandra's free version has some of that as well. The most reliable is likely going to be whatever ships with your motherboard, the software, the MSI or Gigabyte software, that type of stuff. There's some guys in the chat room talking about Real Temp or Core Temp. Real Temp has several suggestions here in the chat room as well. So Real Temp might be an application you want to look up. And then Thordrun said that he ran a CPU up to 95 Celsius during stress testing once, and it didn't die. So, 112 is really, really, really high. I would try to find it and make sure nothing is slowly melting away. But chances are that's a rogue reporting.
A rogue sensor.
A rogue sensor, as the beginning of the email kind of indicates. So that would be what I would say.
I
hate to say ignore something I don't want to say ignore it. I want to say investigate it as best of your ability, and then ignore it, I guess, is what I'm saying. That's what I would do, but maybe I'm a little careless.
You know, somebody once watched me pulling the CPU out of a machine and kind of, firing it up. Like basically I set the cooling block on top of it without putting paste or anything because we were just checking something really quick. And there was this incredible look of absolute horror on their face. And I was just like, look, we can spend 15 minutes putting paste on this and getting it down and screwing all the screws down and putting the thing and laying it down, or we can check the thing we need to check, but I'm like, no, trust me. For 5 minutes, we can let the block sit on top of the CPU without thermal paste, without wiring it down. It's going to conduct a lot of heat. But it's kind of, you get, I guess callous would be the word. Kind of like watching somebody, watching a butcher work with knives tends to be a little frightening, especially if you ever worked in a butcher shop where they're grabbing big giant, basically half a cow or half a pig, and they run it through a bandsaw, and then they have these cleavers that look like they're out of a freaking Hong Kong action flick, and they're chopping ribs and stuff's happening, and you're just like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, But they handle this stuff every day. So it's not that, if it was a real problem, your processor probably would have exploded by now.
Agreed.
Silicon's funny that way. What's coming up on PC Per this week, now that you've settled into your return to Kentucky?
Well, other than planning to leave again on Monday, we have some of the long-awaited, the Radeon 6870 6-display output card. We actually have a pair of those. The review is finally up on that. We are taking a look at the BlackBerry Playbook as well. And also early next week, probably about the time I'm leaving, you'll be able to read about Llano, the first desktop notebook Fusion APU. That's kind of the big push here this week, is me trying to finish all that before I have to leave. So what about on Techzilla? I know you guys just published a new episode today, actually.
We had a lot of fun with this one. We talked about the PS3 and Microsoft keynotes at E3, and of course the OS X Lion. We basically picked our favorite OS X Lion and iOS 5 features because those were all introduced hot and heavy at Worldwide Developers Conference. I got hands-on with AT&T's Veer. I'm actually kind of fascinated by WebOS. The Blip Festival, which is kind of 8-bit audio gathering in New York City. And my favorite segment in a really long time, we had a viewer who we always ask for, questions. If you have we always ask for a certain type of tech question, and somebody actually sent us into if you have a burning need to get a question answered or a question about burning tech, and somebody's like, my tech didn't burn, but a bunch of stuff in my house did, and now my computer smells like smoke. How do I get the smell out? So that was one of the most fun questions I've answered in a really long time, because I have dealt with the horror of having your entire house smell like, nice. Things have burned nearby. And also I've had a toddler recently, so there's been a whole new set of smells I've had to get out of perfectly innocent pieces of plastic and carpet and various and sundry other things. So that was actually one of the, I got to get my Martha Stewart on. Nice. Or my Heloise. It was Heloise's helpful hints. In any case, you can also find out the secret of where I buy my 14-pound sacks of baking soda. Nice. And with that bright and cheerful note, I think we're going to call it for this edition of Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. Twitch at twit.tv is the email. We want your questions. You can also send them to us on Twitter at ryanshrout.com or at Patrick Norton. And as always, we've enjoyed making this podcast for you. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for Netflix for sponsoring us. And that is it. I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.